Welcome everyone to Vision Chats at Johns Hopkins, where the only thing that matters in the next hour is the future. So we are in the middle of a serious public health crisis. And before we proceeded with our discussion, I wanted to take a moment to review some of the data that Johns Hopkins has reported. So first of all, it's been about 194 days since the first reported case of COVID-19 in the world. And it's been about 130 days since the first reported case of COVID-19 in the US. Worldwide, we are at about 5.8 million cases and about 361,000 deaths. And in the US, we're at more than 1.7 million cases and over 100,000 deaths. So in addition to the public health crisis, there's also obviously a profound economic impact. Lots of people are facing a tough job market, including college grads and the millions of those who have been laid off and have filed for unemployment. Today, we are going to talk about reinventing the rules in a recession and some of the new rules in recruiting, hiring, entrepreneurship, the job search. And with me to discuss these topics, I have three amazing guests. I want to introduce first Ritika Puri. I've actually been following Ritika for years. She is a storytelling strategist, a cancer survivor, and an entrepreneur who co-founded a company called Storyhackers. And Storyhackers works with technology companies, governments, and people all over the world. They use advanced analytics and market research to help clients share their stories in a way that resonates. Then I want to introduce Nick Hugh, who is a biomedical engineer from Johns Hopkins and an entrepreneur who has built multiple multi-million-dollar research and development companies after graduating in the 2008 recession. He is CEO of Dianavi Corporation, a company developing an AI-based digital health solution that addresses some of the biggest unmet clinical needs in diabetes. Welcome. And lastly, I want to introduce Rachelle Gupta. She is a partner at Pathrise, which is a YC-backed ed tech startup for early career services. She's led recruiting efforts at Google, GitHub, and the White House during the Obama administration. And she holds a bachelor's from Carnegie Mellon, my alma mater as well. So great, really happy to have that. And I'm really grateful to have all of you here. So let's start with kind of one of the most obvious topics, which is I graduated in the last recession and all three of you did too. So let's talk about that, because I remember graduating and feeling completely unprepared for the real world. And I have lots of stories about that time, but I would love to hear, your thoughts on your personal experience having graduated in the last recession, what that was like for you.
Yeah, I guess I can start. So I graduated in 2008, and I remember spring break, like everything was happening with Bear Stearns being bought by JP Morgan, and like I was about to go to Disney World, and like that's what I was seeing in the morning. I'm like, I'm pretty sure the world is over and I'm never gonna get a job. What were the thoughts that I went through? And also, just like coronavirus, it felt like it happened just overnight, just like boom, like everything is falling apart. So I think everybody that's going through this now, it really is, the whole process, like a whole group of people many people have been through what you're going through right now. Like it feels exactly the same as it did back then. The reasons are different, but the dynamics of how quick it happened were pretty, I think it's been pretty similar.
Rachelle, it's interesting that you describe it as a boom. I graduated in 2009, about a year after you. And I remember that boom. I remember that day being in a business law class, not quite grasping what had happened and not quite understanding. And in the months that followed, this continued perpetuating fear and compounding on that, similar to the health challenges that people are facing today. I had just finished my treatment for a very severe medical condition. And I remember just this horrible fear. You took me back to that moment, Alia, to remember that. And I don't think I had ever felt so low, wondering what was ahead, wondering what my own survival would look like, and how all of these dreams that I had to contribute to this global economy, to have a global business, I thought it was never going to happen. And it was horrifying.
Similar, if I think I was at a transatlantic conference during the financial collapse. It was about a week or two long, and it was fine when we left. And throughout the conference, all the institutions were collapsing, and all the participants, which was North America and Europe, were going, are credit cards going to continue to work because we didn't bring very much cash with us? Do we have jobs to come back to, and do we have a country to come back to at the end of this? And it was kind of precipitating across Europe as well. So it was definitely very scary. But I think, at least for my career path, it's kind of, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, it's just uncertainty and risk all over the place. You're just swimming in it. And so, emerging early in my career into that environment certainly got me conditioned to resisting that environment a little bit more. So there's a little bit of a silver lining. And my fingers crossed, our financial institutions are a little bit more robust this time around, but that's to be seen.
Yeah, Nick, I had a friend that I met like a couple years later, and he had said, well, I knew it was going to be harder to like find a job, but I thought a better thing for me to do was to create more jobs. And that always resonated with me as, that's a like great reframe of like a social responsibility that I need to do this thing because there are less jobs and I need to make the new jobs.
Rachelle, Rachelle, you bring up such an interesting point, because I think seeing this financial collapse ensue was really the first moment that I realized that the path to the future wasn't necessarily going to be a job for me. I was lucky to eventually to find a job during this climate, but something that I had always taken for granted was that, oh, there's going to be a job out there for me. And I went to this great college and there's this very linear track to get into this trajectory. But when everything happened, something that really came to light was, well, maybe the system wasn't what I thought it was. And perhaps there's a time to start creating new systems, and to create what that future of employment would be. So one of my earliest steps was to start a side business when I got that full-time job, to start creating what at the time it was a safety net because I was so afraid, and then it evolved into something more.
It sounds like, it's interesting how it all impacted like our decision making, like tools, like in that moment when we graduated during this time. It was confusing, and it's interesting that two of us decided to go the entrepreneurship route. And then like Rachelle, I think I just pivoted and took a career leap based on like kind of what I could find, to be completely frank. But yeah, I'm curious like how you landed on those two, how you all landed on the decisions that you landed on. Because I mean, for me, for example, it took me like a really long time to get my bearings straight. And I was just like taking whatever I could get at the beginning. And it made me kind of really doubt the whole path that we had been set out for. But I'm curious like how it impacted the way that you decided to move forward and the decisions that you made that might not have had happened if you hadn't been in that exact situation.
Alia, actually building on that question, I'm looking at the chat, and Michelle Jones made a really poignant observation that the big difference between the 2008 financial collapse and today's financial collapse and public health crisis aren't comparable. And absolutely, they're not. They are completely different situations, and they're crises in their own right. And I think that your question really illuminates that point. And another important point that really when this happened and kind of what the similarities were, So at this point now, I'm a small business owner. I have a team of 20 people all over the world. I'm looking at their health and safety. Even in this moment too, we lost business and we were looking at a collapse of our own business, and my survival instinct was triggered. And I remember back then, I had just gone through this very extreme health scenario. So it was kind of this compounding thing, where I also felt my survival instinct very triggered. And to your point also, it was a question of survival. How am I going to get health insurance? How am I going to sustain the income to survive? At that point, my family was impacted. Everybody was impacted. I felt like I had no safety net. Now, even that same safety net. And I think back then, going through that experience prepared me to experience my first uncomfortable professional moment, and uncomfortable moment learning how to survive in spite of ambiguity, and learning how to find meaning and purpose in spite of that ambiguity. And now when the stakes are higher, although my health is not at an imminent threat, I'm fairly healthy right now. It was a question of how to stabilize all of these livelihoods. So in a sense that they're completely different moments and they're completely different experiences, but I felt like it's almost like stepping into that ambiguity with more of a comfort level. So I think it really was just that first step, that first decision was getting my bearings, and finding what I could find, what was out there, and just continuing to seek that point of stability. And it was a very similar mindset in this situation as well.
Yeah, I think Rachelle makes a good point. It's not directly comparable, but I think the common thread is, if we make the analogy of hiking through the woods, whether or not there's a trail there for you to follow, or if you're going to have to kind of find a way, and there's going to be a lot more twists and turns to get through the woods. I think if that was a similar situation where, there weren't open doors for us necessarily, as many open doors for us to walk through, you kind of had to make a door, climb through a window, go find another building, build a hut, something like that. And I think I'm kind of just an infinite optimist, so I don't know how much my perspective will actually, how much value there is. But I was telling Alia last week, the way I view opportunity is kind of like the first law of thermodynamics. It's neither created nor destroyed. It's always there. It just changes form. So, perhaps we initially thought we would go into a job market with a very set path. We can make, advance to partner, advance to senior partner, kind of, up the corporate ladder. The opportunity is there, still there. It's just different. And, that's going to be great for some people who are better, their personality is better suited to deal with that level of ambiguity. And then it'll be a little bit more difficult for other people who perhaps hadn't thought in that direction yet. And kind of the stable foundational organizations and structures of society have all of a sudden shifted in public health or in financial institutions.
In some ways, it can be an opportunity or a gift, I would say, to be forced, or for me personally, to be forced to broaden my horizons and think more about the kinds of dialogue that I was having in my head is how can I be useful? What skills do I have? How are my skills relevant to what the world is at this moment and what the world might be in the future? And I consciously remember thinking about that, because when I was thinking about who I should reach out to and what companies I should target, I was always trying to think of where am I rare? Where do people really need me? And they don't know how to find me. And I want to find them, which turns out to be a very good skill set for a recruiter. So even in that process, I was kind of training myself to be a recruiter, and I didn't know it, because it's the opposite, just looking for candidates later.
Rachelle, what were some of those skills that you found within yourself that bubbled to the surface?
Well, I think the analytical stuff like now it's funny because like now I don't deeply identify with being like a super analytical person, but definitely in college that was, I loved numbers. I loved the story that numbers could tell. And I ended up working in career services, but in my interview, like that's what we were talking about. And that particular office didn't understand numbers, didn't understand like the analytics, didn't understand like how to drive it. And I was like this huge value add that like, I don't think I would have gotten that job otherwise. And also that wasn't very evident even in the job description. But when I was talking to my manager, that was interviewing me, who is like my lifelong mentor now, but it clicked, and it was very obvious that I was filling a gap and that I was rare in that group. And I think I've continued to do that at all of my jobs. Like where am I rare? Where am I rare? Where am I rare? Like at GitHub, I wrote my job description for GitHub because they didn't have it. And I'm like, I think this is what you need. And like, maybe that wouldn't work, but hey, I always think in my head, like the subconscious, like, you know, anxiety or fear, but whenever I have done it, it's worked out really, really well. So, yeah, I was like, should I write my job description? Because they seem like they don't really know what they're talking about. And I did, and they were like, yeah, this is great. Yeah, this is exactly what we want you to do.
There's a theme here, right? Of like kind of writing your own job description, right? Like writing your own company, writing your own job description, kind of like forging your way forward. And I think that's really interesting. And, you know, I'm thinking of like a lot of the college grads who are graduating, or even professionals who've been laid off. But I'm thinking this might be probably more relevant for college grads, like thinking like, this question, where am I rare, which I love, where am I rare? Like how, excuse me, there's a loud motorcycle, but like, how do college students identify, or college grads identify, like how do they even know? Because I think that there's, for me, I remember personally facing, like, I knew I had strengths in school and I knew I had strengths in my university community, but then I was like, how does that translate to contributing to a job? Because that felt like completely unknown territory. And for entrepreneurship, I mean, that wasn't even a question for me. Like I didn't even know where I would start. So what were some of the skills that you guys identified when you were graduating, or when you were working, beyond someone wrote beyond what's written in the job description? How did you identify those things? And then how did you like channel those things to start your companies and or find your job?
I think adding to what Rachelle was just kind of saying as well is, you know, from my cohort of graduates, what we saw was we went out and we got the opportunity, because we had the time to do it, to do a lot of things beyond and earlier in our careers than we normally would have gotten the opportunity had we done 80-hour work week, 100-hour work week at a firm or something like that. So we got to go out and do much higher level tasks much earlier on. We may not have gotten paid to do it, but we got the experience to do that by creating our own projects. People started companies, started publications and things like that. And so when the job market kind of came back, yeah, they were behind in terms of earning throughout their career, but in terms of skill set, they had really kind of accelerated skill sets kind of forged in fire to some degree for those who kind of took that opportunity. So I think there was a little bit of a silver lining in that instead of taking 5 years to get to the skill set that they would have normally taken them, they perhaps got there in a year and a half, or, you know, while they were searching for a job, they brushed up on additional skills, expanded their kind of personal area of expertise, networked a little bit more. So I just wanted to add that quick feedback on Rachelle's response there.
Yeah, I was looking at some of the questions that were coming in, and it seems like the question, the answer is, it's a hard thing to find out what companies are not good at. It's a hard thing to find out like what the future of a job is going to be. You most likely are not going to find it. It's not going to be the first search on your Google search. People don't generally broadcast what they're not very good at, you know? So the only way, maybe there's other ways, but I think the best way to do it is a lot of hard work, and it's having a ton of conversations with people. And I think being very open-minded about like everybody that you're talking to has something to share with you that can be a part of your journey. And once you have enough, like, you know, you have a regression to the mean, you start to figure out what the outliers are, what things are unusual or different, or what like little gaps are going to be. But I think the only way that I know to do it is to have a lot of conversations. And I mean, when I was looking for a job, everybody knew I was looking for a job. And I think there's a tendency for people to like hide that in, like, oh, I don't want people to know I got laid off, or I don't want people to know all of this stuff. No, like every interview I had, I'm like, I had an interview. It didn't go well. This is why I didn't think it went well. This is what I think I'm working on. You know, I was sharing that with people, and I was being vulnerable with people. And a lot of times is if you don't leave it super broad of like, oh, I just can't get a job, but you're like, it's maybe more like, oh, I just can't get a job in consulting. It seems like my policy background isn't really resonating with people. Then they say, oh, well, like, why is that? Is it because of this? Or I find that strange because I think this is great about your policy background. And so that's something that back and forth teaches you something a little bit. But I'm not gonna lie, it's hard work. It's hard work, but it leads to jobs that you will probably find more satisfying and more interesting. Like I feel very fortunate to say this, but in a lot of ways, I think I worked really hard for it. Like I've never had a job that I didn't like. I've loved like all of my jobs. And I can't say that about a lot of my friends that graduated at the same time that maybe ended up in these like really like hi-fi great places with high salaries and all of that. But because I had to do that work of understanding what's important to me and connecting it to the world, I think that's why. I mean, maybe I got super, super lucky over and over and over again, but I think it's because I had to do a lot of that work. And it sucks. By the way, like I'm an introvert. I don't like consider myself really a hustler. It was about like what Ritika was saying, like survival. It was just about like, I know I have to do this and this is really uncomfortable for me. And now I'm pretty good at it, but it took like maybe 10 years.
Well, it's so interesting that you talk about, really liked that you shared vulnerable, which I was one of the people who did not want to tell anybody that I was looking for. I mean, I did tell people, but I had a lot of shame. I felt shame and felt so unprepared. And I think I would have gotten a lot, I would have made a lot more progress in a shorter amount of time if I would have been more vocal, like you said. And I think the other really interesting thing that you said that I learned a lot from was very, I don't know what the right word is, but like being removed and not taking it personally. You were like, okay, this isn't work. It's probably because, and I what that issue was, rather than like, I think one of the things I did is like, I'm not good enough. Like, I don't know enough. But if you can like very clearly identify like, oh, this isn't working because of X, then that gives you, like, as you said, an ability to get feedback and work on something. It like puts control back in your hands a little bit. So I'm curious to hear, there's some questions about working, and I also want to talk about vulnerability, because I know that during the vulnerable and feeling vulnerable, and some people have a harder time sharing that. But people are asking about like connections virtually. How helpful were your existing networks in helping you get off the ground to that like stable point from from I'm not surviving to surviving?
Sure. And Rachelle and Nick, I love the points that you brought up about being a perpetual optimist and this forcefulness of needing to put yourself out there. And I'm kind of watching these chat messages come in as a stream. So thank you everybody for asking these thoughtful questions. One skill that I think that I was able to bring to the table, and it was interesting because in college, like I was all about putting myself out there and being very vocal and being very extroverted. But when I graduated, I was at a very vulnerable point personally that I actually found it really hard to put myself out there to that extent. I was suffering from depression. I was feeling a sense of hopelessness and a loss of optimism, but really returned to this idea that it is ingrained within our human spirit to be optimistic. It is okay to be optimistic, that we have no other choice but to do good in the world. And actually, what was very helpful to me was this gift of my college alumni network. And that was my first resume job in the tech industry that opened a door. And somebody asked the question about how to tell if, like, how you can find an employer, understanding what their needs are, especially when you haven't spent time in the business world. And that's a really great point, because both now and then, it's easy to look at a company and be like, wow, they know exactly what they're doing. They have these PR things, they have these recruiting programs. But if you, right now, I work with a lot of heads of finance, a lot of CEOs, and they're human beings. They're wondering, what the heck do I do? I have to be strong. And in being strong, I have to acknowledge what I don't know. I need to make sure that my company is going to be solvent in the next couple of years with all of these bankruptcies. So this first step that I took, it was kind of like a gradual step. I ended up finding this job through my college alumni network. It was an open door for me. Like, now you can actually go online and see what companies are hiring. There are all these lists floating around Google Docs of like who's hiring, who's raising funding. So there's a bit more transparency. But back then I was like, okay, who's hiring? Like, where can I get a job? Like, so I looked at my college alumni network. I really didn't feel like getting out there and networking. I was very lucky to be called in for an interview. And I remember that interview. My then boss, it was the first moment we met. He's actually now one of my business partners. We've been working together for more than 10 years, and one of my best friends. His name is Nick Allen. He's been one of the most influential people in my career. And Nick sits down with me and he says, company's going through some really tough times. We can't pay you that much. It's not going to be the most glamorous job. You're probably not going to advance. 4 years later, they more than double my salary. I've gone to Shanghai twice. I'm getting bonuses like crazy. I've just been promoted, and I'm writing my own job descriptions and working with the general manager of the company, of a subsidiary of a publicly trained company, to implement new programs. And I think what really carried me far was understanding the vulnerabilities of leadership, recognizing that even sometimes my energy as a young person might even feel scary to others on the team who may be worried about their jobs, or they have families and they're so spread thin, because as you progress through life and the responsibilities pile up, and now people are sheltered in place at home and not sleeping, and their family members are essential workers, and there's so much stress. Sometimes that enthusiasm can be scary to some people. Sometimes it's welcome, sometimes it's scary. But I think something that really helped me was continuing to build that trust with people, and just going into listening mode and seeking out the opportunities, doing the job I'm told, having no expectations of advancing. I didn't actively look for these promotions. Like, they surprise promoted me with my first promotion. I never asked. And it was about just listening, being empathetic, trying to understand how businesses work and how I can actively step in to help, sometimes without being asked to do it, without telling them that I'm doing, but just doing it. And that was something that helped me a lot.
Did you feel like your first manager really believed in you and was like a champion for you?
100%. But it wasn't necessarily an instantaneous thing. It was what I really loved about working for Nick was that he was always very honest with me. He was always like, he knew that I was going through some stuff, and he just sort of gave me the space to do that. And when he always made sure that I got credit where it was due. I remember when I went back to school during this time period, and he he actually took part of his bonus that he received to give me part of his bonus, so that I could buy textbooks to go to school. And but it wasn't like, it really evolved out of this friendship, you know. It didn't happen instantaneously. It just came from this natural friendship that unfolded, and this sense of support for each other. And so it wasn't any business thing. It was just sort of, how can I help this person who's a couple of years older than me, and he's teaching me about life. He teaches me how to change my tail light. And it was that kind of relationship that really unfolded.
Yeah, when I'm working with students and they're between two jobs, I'm always like, well, who's your manager going to be, and how do you feel about them? Like, does it feel like someone that you really want to work with? Because like, companies can change, but if that manager really enjoyed working with you, people like to take their good people to those places too.
Yeah, that's a great point, because when I was coming into the market, I had my typical corporate interviews, and after 3 or 4 of them, I immediately went, this is most definitely not for me. It's not where, I mean, I'll thrive in that position, but I'm not going to really love it and enjoy it, and, you know, enjoy going to work every day like I do now. And I think, jumping on, both of you said you basically wrote your own job descriptions, right? So as someone who's hiring, that's like, oh my gosh, can I please have someone who can do that? Because what's the most valuable thing to, you know, a company is to be able to have someone who tells you what you don't know, right? There's like, that's the most coveted thing, is all the unknown unknowns. That's what's going to drive down all the risk for you. Yeah. And I think just some advice because I'm sure you guys have, I've hired a lot of fresh graduates, and they will stratify into tiers of how they look on paper. And then it's really hard to differentiate them, because they all have the same skills. They took the same classes. They did similar internships. And so what we're looking for is not so much the list of skills and things you know how to do. That's sort of a given and a must. And we'll very quickly find out in the first technical interview if you can do those things. We're looking for people like Ritika and Rachelle and everyone else who has judgment, right? If you've got someone who knows how to do tasks very well, you still have to tell them all the things that they need to do. If you have someone who can look around and figure out what tasks should be done, and then even know how to do it and learn how to do it, that's like the most valuable additional team member. So if you're out interviewing, talking to, you know, either it's a job solicitation or you're networking, what you want to demonstrate the most is that you have good judgment, because judgment's going to save time and reduce risk for both your management, your supervisor, your team members, and your entire organization.
Yeah, so I see a lot of comments about, like, you know, how do I get attention of recruiters? How do I kind of get my foot in the door? If I don't have experience, like, how do I do that? And I want to like give you like maybe a different perspective. So as someone who has been a recruiter for lots of organizations that people have wanted to work for, don't think about getting the attention of a recruiter. Like, I think I'm a pretty great recruiter, and I'm probably more technical than like 95% of recruiters. And even then, the recruiter hasn't done that job. The recruiter has at best, shallow but good intentioned understanding of that job. Who understands that job is the person that's doing it. And I'll tell you, as a recruiter, if the hiring manager or someone else that has done the job is like, oh, this person reached out to me, I had a conversation with them, they seem pretty good, can you like maybe interview them? I'm not going to be like, sorry, I don't have time to interview this person, and I know better who can like do this job. You know, I'm going to interview them. I'm going to give them a chance. So I would try to reframe, there's like this big focus on recruiters, like they're these amazing like gatekeepers, and they are these gatekeepers, but they're not everything. and they're people and they're not perfect and they don't always know like how the job might connect. The other thing, I just want to give people like some tangible things. Like if you don't know where to start with these conversations, and maybe you don't even exactly know what you want to do, but like, let's say in your head, you're like, I really want to be a machine learning engineer. And you when you're going out networking, I would go out with the purpose of, I want to find out what it means, what it looks like to be really good at this job. And I'm going to write those things down, like, you know, keep notes. And then each person that you talk to, say, you know, I've been talking to a bunch of people about trying to understand like what it looks like to be really good at this job. They've told me this. Does that seem like I'm on the right track? Is there something that I'm missing? Is there something that's wrong? Like, is there nuance that I'm missing? And then you'll get better and better at understanding what someone that's good at the job is. And most people don't think about what it's like to be good at their job. And they will be, maybe not the first conversation, but if you have 10 of those conversations, that person will be so impressed that you know their job maybe better than they do from a high level about like what success looks like. So if you don't know where to start, that's where I would start. Start with those conversations, and then
it's kind of like rowing, right? You can be a really strong independent rower, but when you jump on a boat with other people, if you're rowing the wrong direction, opposite direction, out of sync, you're kind of a detriment, overall negative for the team. So that's a great point. So when you're hiring people into your team, you want to make sure they're a strong rower and they know which direction to row.
Yeah, but really the reason why this is successful is because like nobody does this. Like people ask me for advice and I tell them to do this. I'd say probably 2% of the people I talk to actually go and do it. And I'll tell you, every single one of them, like they got a job, like they get jobs way quicker than other people, but it's hard work. Like it's not going to drop on your lap and it's vulnerable. And a lot of people are going to not respond to your requests, but that doesn't matter. It's the people that do respond.
And I was going to add too, just to add, like one of the things I feel that people will email once and they'll be like, okay, they didn't respond. So like, they don't want to, and I'm like, no, you got to follow up. Like, I am so appreciative when someone follows up with me at least once and says, hey, I don't know if you missed this, but I'm like, thank you. Yes, I saw this and I wanted to support, but I got busy. So I think like there's a little bit of persistence. I mean, don't send like a million emails, but there's a little bit of persistence. And like, also, I mean, just hearing from your perspectives, like what have been either useful ways for you to get in touch with people who you wanted to get in touch with, like tactically, like what do you do, or what has worked for you? I remember when I graduated, I applied to 100 jobs, got rejected from every single one. And I had been applying through what I call the black hole job portal. And I thought that was the way that I was going to get a job, and it never worked. And then after my 100th rejection, I was like, all right, like time to change the way you're doing things. This is not working. And I remember seeing like a lecture. It was I don't even remember his name, some gentleman who came to Carnegie Mellon, and they had recorded it and sent it to all of us. And he was talking about like going through the back door and getting connected with people. And I think I just started, I would find people, I think on LinkedIn, or someone, I think you had mentioned, Ritika, the university network. Like I would go in the CMU alum directory and look for companies that were hiring. And then I would find someone on LinkedIn who worked at that company who went to CMU, and I would try to find their email and I would send them an email. And like, yeah, Rachelle, you're right. Like 80% of the time people didn't respond, but 20% of the time they did. And that would lead me to a conversation with this company and then another company. And I was just, it's like what you're saying, you're gathering intelligence and gathering data. And then the more data you have, the more intelligent you sound when you're talking to a person at that company. But yeah, so I just want to go back to kind of tactically, like, let's say, I think this process works for people who are extroverted. I'm an extrovert. Rachelle, you seem to be an extrovert. Maybe
No,
some people.
I'm an introvert.
Oh, okay. Well, I wouldn't be able to tell.
I just been forced to like be like this, but yeah.
That's funny. Yeah. So like, what do you do?
Order pizza. Like that's the worst. I'd rather not eat.
It's
See,
like
I
what
would
you
have
said.
never known that.
it's side doors, back doors, and windows, right? And so the front door is almost sometimes, I think, the worst place to get into. I don't know about the larger companies, but smaller companies, if you meet someone who is great talent, you want to make a position for them. You want that talent in your organization. And so I think don't be like, I'm extremely introverted, but I'm forced to be extroverted when I have to be, when I enjoy it. So, but sort of, but you know, networking, don't be shy, always reach out, because people who are established in their careers, they've benefited from the mentorship of people before them, and they want to give back. The issue is going to be time. They want to look at you and think, if I'm going to spend X amount of my time helping you and mentoring you, are you going to learn and listen and grow from that? And your requests really need to be specific. So I don't think I'm in quite the position to do that sort of mentoring yet, but I get a lot of requests that's asking for my background, my experience, my story, but I don't have 4 hours a week to do all of that. But if someone says, I'm trying to get into this company, what is it do you think that specific company is looking for? I can shoot you a really quick email, go on a 10-minute call, and I can add real tangible value. But giving my story is a little bit difficult one-on-one.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
Something to think about also, building on these ideas, Nick and Rachelle. So this pandemic has shifted the way companies are thinking about long-term planning. And during this shift, there's a big question of what the organization is going to look like in years to come. But before all of this happened, companies are and were really excited about bringing on the next generation of talent, because you see the world in a way that other generations don't. You're the first generation to grow up with technology by your side. Are some of the Gen Z hires on our team at Storyhackers, we never intended to hire them. Every time somebody comes to our company, it's almost like, oh wow, this person has all of these ideas and they would add value in this capacity. And they never, like when they approach me or anybody on the team, it's never like, I want a job. It's, I want to get to know you. I want to learn what you're doing. In some cases, I just lost my job. I'm super sad. I'm crying. I don't know what to do. And that creates a power, and that puts power in your hands to approach a company and say, hey, what's going on in your world? And to step up and even say, well, I could help in this type of capacity. And having those organic conversations, something that we're always thinking about is creating space for more people and building operations around the talents of others, and integrating that that level of bi-directional mentorship. And I'm always learning so much from, I always consider it a gift. Some people said, well, how do I get a job if I'm not experienced? Well, I consider it a gift when people come to me with that level of blank slate, to be able to see the world through this lens. And those opportunities evolve organically. Like if we can't sustain a hire at this point, I'm always extra eyes for anybody who comes to me and says, well, I kind of want to do this, or I'm interested in this. I will go talk to a hiring manager at another company and say, hey, you need to consider hiring this person for XYZ skills, and they can help your business over the long term by bringing this perspective to the table, and you can mentor them into XYZ role. So you can think about even defining what the blueprint of a company is going to be in the years to come, because we need help and we need that expertise from the people who are just graduating from college now and have that sophistication with technology that it's so easy to take for granted. But I would love to someone to tell me how Snapchat works. I don't understand. Like, tell me how TikTok works. I don't understand. And it's such a fresh, wonderful perspective. So don't underestimate that incredible talent. And your experience it's different, and it can define what the global workforce and economy is going to be in the next couple of years.
And I think that's a lot of fresh graduates, not even, especially in this time, but even before, one of their big concerns is I don't have experience. People are looking for experience. But I can tell you from the hiring perspective, what trumps experience is judgment and capability to learn and perform faster. Because if I had to choose between someone who had 5 years of experience, but they just do what they're told versus someone who has great judgment and can really learn really quickly, I would prefer that. And they're usually cheaper too if they're younger. So I think judgment and showing that you have great thought, great intellect, strategy, passion, that trumps experience, at least in my book when I'm hiring, because I know we might have to invest a little bit more early on, but the fruits of that is going to be way more than someone who's done it before necessarily.
And actually, you bring up a really good point. I used to work at a company called Ironhack, and our head of kind of outcomes in Miami, Brito, he would always say, like, you can't teach like good attitude and like good judgment, and you can't teach like work ethic. You can teach like tangible skills, but you can't teach like that energy and that passion. But I think what you're saying too is like making good judgment, that a student needs to be able to be a good storyteller, right? Because they need to be able to like reflect back on when, in all of these interviews, you need to be able to talk about a time where you were able to accomplish XYZ or solve XYZ, or be able to reflect on your experiences. And I think that that's also like a new skill to be learned when you're making that transition of like,
for sure.
Some students really nail it because they've been doing it their whole lives. And I do think that there's like an element of privilege to be able to do it. Like if you've, been raised in a world that has taught you that the storytelling is super important. But like, yeah, how did you guys come together with like your pitch or your story, or like how you talk about yourself? Because I find that to be very challenging for a lot of college grads.
Yeah, I mean, two questions. Tell me about yourself and tell me about a time when you worked on something challenging or whatever. And if you don't have an answer to a time that you're excited about talking about, that means you need to find an answer. Like you need to go out and do something that you're excited about. And it doesn't have to be like your be all end all passion, but you need to go out there and do something that when you talk about it, you light up. Because like as a recruiter, that's what I would be looking for. There's all the things that people tell everybody, and you're kind of going through the motions. And then there's the part in the interview where the candidate lights up, and that tells me like, oh, that's what they really like working on. That's what really makes them excited. And if you don't have that, like, that just means you need to work on it. You need to go out there and do it. And it doesn't need to be a 1 year long project or anything like that. It might be at a nonprofit. It might be a volunteer thing that you do, but you need to find a challenge to work on that makes you excited. In this crisis, if it's something about COVID, there's so many data sets out there. There's so many people that need a lot of help and just don't know what the answers are. Work on one of that. You don't have to boil the whole ocean. Work on a small part of that problem. It might grow into something else, but at the very least, it'll give you something to talk about in your interviews if you don't have something already.
And there are some questions and comments in the chat about kind of introverts as an introvert and as an engineer. I think I can say a lot of engineers are very introverted. So hiring is very difficult because some people really excel at interviewing and getting the job, but other people really excel at the job. They don't always line up to be the same people. And it's a very costly mistake for an organization to invest in someone like that. So, the interview process also tells you a lot about your employer. So when we hire engineers, we have a technical interview where they're, kind of grilled on the spot so that we can understand how their minds work. And some people excel at that. They thrive under pressure. Some people just completely clam up. But we want to give those people a chance to shine as well. So then we also have a component that you take home, you have your time to think about it, you come back, there's no pressure there. Because we saw that if we just did in-person technical interviews, we got a subset of the good engineers. But then if we started doing the second portion, we got another subset of also very good high performers. So, and I tell people, don't be afraid of technical interviews. If you're an engineer, analyst, anything technical in your field, Because if you go through a super intense process and you join that company, you know everyone else went through that process and everyone has a basic level of competency. If they said, I like you as a person, welcome to this technical team, you'll be a little surprised at the colleagues that you may have to work with on the technical side. They might be great people, but can they do their work?
Yeah, I think like, so a lot of the students that I work with at Pathrise are introverts. Not actually, it's probably half. And I think like sometimes it's about like using their strengths. Like some people are really great in person and one-on-one, and they do okay with that. In general, I'm okay with that. I'm not really great with groups, but some people are great, right? Like very communicative writers. And so one major issue is often like that someone doesn't feel deeply, it doesn't seem to the recruiter or to the recruiting team that you seem deeply excited about the opportunity. And sometimes it would take a long time to unprogram like all of the reasons why like verbally that happens. But if they are really excited, I usually say, hey, your emails need to really show that excitement. Like you're a great writer, talk about those things, or like, let me see the email first, and we'll make sure like the tone really like shows that vulnerability that you're really excited about the opportunity, because I'm afraid that they are not going to perceive that you're excited, even though I know that you would love this job and you would kick ass in it, that you'd be great at it, and you are really excited about it. So, and I think like, you know, when in 2008, like LinkedIn, like not everybody was on LinkedIn, like Facebook only came out like 4-ish years earlier. And there's all of these different networks and communities that you can plug into. And like LinkedIn is pretty ubiquitous now, but I would think about other communities that are out there online, especially like with all this COVID stuff, that you can connect with people. And I'll share a very short story. My referral at Google, I was referred to Google by someone that I have never met. I still have not met her. We had one conversation on the phone. She wrote a incredibly thoughtful email to my skip level manager about why I should be hired. I still have not met this person. And I met her on an online forum where she posted a sales job. And I said, oh, I don't think I would really do the sales job, but I saw this job at Google. Do you think you could refer me for that? And she went out of her way to do this. This is a complete stranger, right? And I think maybe I impressed her a little bit on my call, like enough to do that. But if I could tell you all of the people that I tried to connect to with Google earlier, like that doesn't matter. But that one person, not only did she connect, like she went above and beyond. And I know that made a difference in me getting hired. So I think finding those communities these days, I think like LinkedIn is super saturated. And it's kind of like the low-hanging fruit. I think there's also like these Slack communities and other email communities, and maybe honestly, like probably some subreddits. It could probably end up with people getting jobs. Find those smaller communities where you can connect with people, like-minded people that can help champion you. And I think also, like the company that I work for, Pathrise, we mentor students and meet with them every week and all that. And they compensate us for that. And that's not something that really existed before. But I mean, if you're completely opposed to like going out and doing like the hard work and finding a mentor yourself, there are companies out there where you can essentially like pay someone to talk to you and to help coach you and support you in that way. But in general, like finding a good mentor is absolutely worth it, I think, throughout your career.
Rachelle, oh, go ahead, Nick.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, really quick, just building on that, something, whenever people reach out to me, and when those conversations unfold, inevitably, somebody will say like, I was so afraid to reach out to you because I thought you were busy, and I'm always afraid to reach out with that thoughtful email because people are busy. Don't be afraid. We want to be your support system. We want to see you rise we see your skills as integral to what the future needs. And that fear, yes, some people are busy, but they'll tell you that you're busy. They're busy, and that's okay. But waiting for those moments that the person isn't busy or really resonates with maybe a common cause or a higher purpose that you articulate, those connections are lifelong.
That's the worst case, is you get ignored. No one's ever going to look at the email and say, how annoying, why did they email me? They're just going to feel bad, like, oh man, I'm so busy, I'm so sorry, I can't respond to you right now. And then maybe it drops off. So there's never a negative reaction to it.
Yeah, they're not going to go out of their way to like screw you over. Like, oh, this person sent me
emailed me.
Can you please blacklist them for a job at this company ever? Like, how audacious of them. Like, no one will go out of their way to screw you over. I mean, maybe it's possible.
They'll feel bad for ignoring you. That's like the worst.
Yeah,
that's the most, right?
And it was a like ex partner thing. So like, that's the only time I've ever seen someone go out of my way to say, hey, do not hire this person, please.
Yeah. Well, and I think most people in hiring positions understand this. It's like, when you see talent, because good talent is so rare, when you see talent, you might go, wow, that's really good talent. There's not really a place for my organization, but my friend at, or my partner at, or my colleague at, they're looking for talent. I want to share this, connection with them. It's so hard to find talent. If you can demonstrate good judgment, good talent, beyond just, the typical skills, asking for a job, if you don't fit in my organization, I'm going to try to give you to a friend where they're desperately seeking talent that, would suit you. So definitely reach out. It's selfish on the hiring manager's part, because our friends give us referrals all the time, and that's the best hire, is when someone else is vouching for him or her, right? So
yeah, and in the last company I worked for, we like took referrals so seriously. I remember our founder would say, like, every referral he got, he would make me interview them. Even if I didn't like their profile, he would be like, nope, they were a referral, you need to talk to them. Like, he trusted referrals above all else. So, well, we're wrapping up, but I think kind of one of the kind of conclusions from this part, I think, is being more comfortable with rejection and putting yourself out there. And I remember, I don't know if you guys remember this, like a couple years ago, there was a blogger who, I don't remember the name, I think it was like 100 Days of Rejection or something. And he like started doing like small things. He would ask for small things and then build them up over time, and like try to get, that's it. Which I think is a good lesson in the learning for right now, because I think we all have to put ourselves out there just a little bit more. And we had to then, and people have to now, in order to make it kind of to that next piece. But to wrap this up, I'm going to end with a question that Farouk always asks in his vision chats. Describe the future in one word, one image, or one phrase. I'll give you a second to think about it.
I could do a phrase.
Got it.
Just courage to forge a new path, or your own path. Just go for it.
This is the wrong answer. A female was the first thing that came to mind.
All right,
Sorry.
New paradigm.
Yeah. My response is promising. I think that there's, yes, a lot of systems are breaking down right now, but there'll be a lot of reinvention. And I hope that the leaders who take charge will build it in a new way. Okay.
The opportunity is there. It looks different. It's in different places, but it's there.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. So I think people can reach you all through LinkedIn if you want to be reached. Farouk always ends his talks where there's only one certain vision for the future. It's the one that you create. So thank you, everyone, for talking with me today and for being patient as my internet randomly cut out for the first time in weeks today. But it was really a pleasure to talk with you all, have you share your stories, and we're really grateful, and we're eager and happy to continue helping. So thanks for all of the wonderful and thoughtful questions as well, and the wonderful comments. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity to share.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.